We're off finally to a great start in the SEC basketball season, and it only gets better from here.
We've been waiting for that day for quite a while. Richard Hendrix with us now from the SEC Network and ESPN. You saw him on the Bama-Oklahoma game. We'll talk about all the games with Richard, though. Welcome in, Richard. Happy New Year. Hope things are going well for you.
Doing great, guys. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on. Let's just start with a broad picture before we drill into some of the individual games. We had been waiting to see this first weekend, and what we saw is not all double-digit win teams are created equally, right? I mean, we saw a clear separation from what we already thought were the elite teams versus maybe the teams that didn't play the most difficult out-of-conference schedule.
Well, they definitely didn't disappoint in the opening week. And obviously, when you have, as Lenardi had, I think, 13 teams in the NCAA tournament field, it's interesting when you try to say which team is best when you have some undefeated teams, you have some teams with one loss. But obviously, you were able to see the teams that are rated at the top of the AP and coaches poll were able to take care of business in the opening round.
So when you look at this Alabama team, obviously they win going away. Porter Moser, Oklahoma was undefeated. I brought this up. Like, we talk about how good these starters are, but this bench outscoring Oklahoma 38-5. I mean, that is a nice luxury to have. We know they would have depth this year, but Nate Oates, to be able to rely on this bench for instant offense, that's just another luxury they've got.
Absolutely. This is a deep team, and, they played really well. They've started to shore up the defensive end, which they struggled with early on in this non-conference slate. But the ability for them to come at you in waves is the difference that they make. And what they've been able to do is to be able to do it with athletic bodies to get on the offensive glass. You talk about what they were able to do against Oklahoma as far as 25 second chance points to 4 and outpacing them, shooting 11 more field goals in the game. That was the biggest difference in the game. The field goal percentage that the Sooners shot wasn't too bad, but it's just the fact that Alabama is going to continue to get more attempts up than their opponent with their physicality, athleticism, and the relentless pace and pressure that they put on you.
I want to talk about that defense because we talked about it on the new episode of the Basketball Show, which is out right now wherever you get any of our programming up here with Taylor Korn and myself. But last year they were in the 100s in defense. When they got to the tournament, they played better defense. That's why they made it to the Final Four. Where is the defense improving in your opinion? Like how'd they take Fears out of the game early on when Fears was 0 of 8 for his first 8 shots? Who is stepping up defensively for this team, you think?
Well, I think Jeremiah Fears is obviously a really good player. He's a pro prospect, but he's a young player, 17, 18 years old when he just came on campus. And, he ran into the physicality and the veteran play of the guards of Alabama. Mark Sears in particular, who came back to Alabama to try to improve his draft status by way of showing what he can do on the defensive end, is physically, imposing from the guard position. He was able to make it difficult on him. I think the real difference that Alabama is going to have to make on the defensive end is what are your bigs and wings going to do as far as rim protection and being able to switch on multiple pick and rolls. If they can contain dribble penetration, guard their guys one-on-one on an island, and then have some good rim protection and contest shots, then they're only going to it only makes them stronger. Now, obviously, Clifford Amore was a big man that they signed in to come in and be an anchor. I do think that his defensive prowess has not been seen yet because of the different style of what they play in the Big Ten compared to the SEC. He'll have to continue to get up with the rhythm of the SEC, more pick and roll coverage, faster pace. And then if he can be able to do that with his rim protection and hopefully his ability to guard in the low post, we'll be able to show the true strength of this Alabama defensive team.
He did have 10 and 7 in just 17 minutes, though. I mean, if you only play him 17 minutes and get 10 and 7 out of him, that's pretty good 17 minutes, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, but you have to kind of look at the personnel in which you're playing with. I mean, this is a team that was picked preseason number 2 and picked to win the SEC. Oklahoma doesn't have a low post threat or a big who's able to really impose their will. Now, Sam Godwin did an outstanding job in the last game, but it was a lot of dirty work buckets and putbacks and whatnot. You have to be able to raise your level of defense against the elite bigs in not only the SEC, but in the country. And that's what's going to be asked of him as they move forward to try to compete in the SEC.
Who do you feel like has the best defense right now in the SEC? Would you go Tennessee or Auburn?
I think I would probably have to give the nod to Tennessee, and that's a close, just by a hair, and mainly because Rick Barnes' teams are going to play so physical. You have Zakai Ziegler, who can pressure the ball 94 feet and just be a pest. They have a real defensive stud in Jamal Meshack. He can switch on so many people. He can guard in the post. He's disruptive and gets steals at a high level. I think he had 3 in the last game. He's able to guard multiple positions, and he understands his role. And that type of mentality that you have from a defensive leader starts to permeate over to the rest of the roster. So I'd have to give the nod to the best defensive team, to Tennessee right now.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question. Who plays defense legally the best in the SEC? Because, my goodness, you watch Tennessee and the fouls they don't call in Knoxville when that team's playing defense, and you watch anybody else in the league, and it's totally different. They let Tennessee play a style.
Well, I tell you this, as a basketball player, you might have heard people say, if you foul 20 times, the officials will call it 20 times. If you foul 40 times, the officials will call it 20 times. They're not going to foul the entire team out. So I think it benefits teams to play to the level of the foul. When you're able to play with that level of intensity, it's the crowd's going to get into it. The coaches are going to get on the officials. They're not going to foul you out. And you're allowed to get away with a little bit more. And I don't blame teams that might not have the same level of offensive skill of playing this way and making the game a little bit more rugged. It's an advantage that they can utilize. And obviously it has Tennessee ranked at the top of the country.
I think Auburn's defense is why they're so good. But offensively, they're able to go on these hot streaks, scoring runs. They did it again in the first half this past weekend against Missouri, 23-8. You played the game. What is it about Auburn that sort of lights a fire that they can go on those 20-6, 23-8 runs? How does that momentum get juicing for them?
Well, I think this Auburn team is unique compared to others because they have the personnel to play with a diversity of play style. And what I mean by that is they can play up tempo. They have the athletes to switch defensive positions all over the court, 1 through 5. They can press you and make you speed up the game. And then they have the luxury of having the best big in the conference in Janai Broome in the low post. When they can throw it into him, he can command a double team, and he's unselfish and kicks it out for 3-pointers. And another big in Dylan Cardwell, who plays well off of him as an energy man. So that type of ability to be able to play in multiple styles is huge for what they're trying to do. And it's a big reason why they look like the best team in the country.
There was Richard Hendrix is with us at rhendrix35 on social media, and you can see him on the SEC Network and ESPN. He was on the Bama game Saturday, so you'll see him throughout the season. He's always kind with his time with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. I don't know the analyst. It's a guy that played or coached the game, but he's with the Field of 68. And I'll send you this, Richard. I'll text it to you. You may have already seen it, but he says there's an offensive set that Auburn runs that he thinks is unstoppable. Now, nothing is unstoppable, but he's like, I haven't seen anybody stop it yet. And it basically involves the on-ball screen on one side. They run everybody on the other side, and he goes, it forces you to make choices, and everybody's making the wrong choice on it right now, all because of Janai Broome. He's just a matchup nightmare. You talked about him. And one thing he does that is so underrated, we discussed earlier, he might be one of the best passers in the low post in the country.
Right. I don't know if anything offensively is unguardable. The key to basketball, just like any other sport, is the team with the better players has the better chance to win. And I don't care what plays you run. If you have really good talent, it's going to be effective. And it's not that just Auburn has good talent, but they have really good positional size. They have good basketball IQ to read situations and skill set where you can play down low and play on the perimeter. So when you have good offensive sets to be able to get players in space, then they're really able to take advantage of all of the things that you can do from an offensive side. But they're really good. I've been able to see them up close and personal. I'm looking forward to seeing how they play as they get deeper and deeper in the SEC. They have a really good home court advantage. But after the first round, I tell you, it's going to be a tough SEC. It's not just Auburn and the rest of the field. Kentucky looks strong. Florida with 2 guards that at an elite level are really good. Alabama played, I think, their best ball last Saturday. And obviously Tennessee is always going to be solid. And that's not to leave out anyone else in the league. It's going to be a gauntlet the entire year.
Richard, back to Florida, 13-0 going into Rupp on Saturday morning. And look, they'd beaten some names. They hadn't beaten any ranked teams, but Clayton goes for 33. I was more impressed in their loss than I had been in any of their 13 wins. Is that fair?
Well, I think that backcourt of Walter Clayton Jr. and Elijah Martin is elite. And the biggest reason is because these are two tough, hard-nosed guards who can defend, they can shoot from deep, and they have experience. What makes a winning recipe in college basketball now is to have an older roster. And when you have experience in the guard position, it always gives you a chance. And they played a tough Kentucky team who plays really well. Mark Pope has that team playing good basketball and offense. They run a 5-out set that's hard to guard. But when those two guards at Florida can get it going and you pair that with Condon on the low post, they have a really tough team to play against. So they're going to be there in the end as well.
We're so far from Selection Sunday. There's 17 regular season SEC games left. But Seth Greenberg said during halftime of that Kentucky-Florida basketball game that he's getting close to saying Auburn versus the field because of the way they can play fast or slow, inside or out, most complete team. And then Dennis Gates afterwards, and this is what I want to ask you about. After his team lost down at Neville Arena Saturday, the Missouri coach said, this team reminds me of Virginia that had that chip on their shoulder. They lost in the first round the year before, and then it came back the next year to win the national championship, that this Auburn team is playing with a chip. Is that a real thing? You played the game. Can you play with a chip from the previous year?
Absolutely. And that's been one of the biggest reasons why I've given Auburn the nod is because of that defeat in the first round against Yale in the NCAA tournament. You have core players returning to that team. I don't know if it's so much more of a chip that you're playing with to win games, but when you are disappointed in the season before, you understand the importance of paying attention to detail and focusing on every single game and every single moment. This Auburn team seems to be locked in, and they're playing really good basketball. That could definitely be a motivation for why they're playing so solid this year.
Before you go, Richard, was there a team that lost that you maybe you were a little – you don't think the loss is that true team? Maybe you're a bit disappointed in them. Maybe you would say, hey, don't read too much into that loss. This is still a really good basketball team, because a lot of these losses were extremely one-sided in this first weekend.
Yes, I think that if people haven't got a chance to watch the Georgia team, Mike White is really doing a really good job, and they have some quality wins in the non-conference against St. John's. They were able to beat Grand Canyon. That obviously Alabama played last year in the NCAA tournament, a team that can definitely just grind it out. So that's a team that plays a really good style of ball. They can slow it down as well. They might not have the talent as some of the other elite teams in the league, but they play really well and they're connected. Asa Newell is a big-time freshman, 6'11", can shoot from the outside, score in the post, and defend. He'll be a lottery pick in next year's NBA draft. So this is a team that I think if they can get favorable matchups as far as the schedule is concerned with their home games and who they're playing against and the timing in which they play some of these teams, they can be a little bit more competitive amongst the elite teams in the SEC than people might think.
Their next 5 are host Kentucky, host Oklahoma, at Tennessee, host Auburn, at Arkansas.
See, and that's the problem.
That's not favorable.
Yeah, and that's the problem with every team in the Southeastern Conference. I think this is going to come down to the wire just like it did last year for the last 1 to 2 weeks at the end of the season. But it's all about who you play and when you play them. I think you can look at Alabama's schedule and see who they have in the last 3 to 4 games at the end of the regular season. And that is something that I wouldn't say is favorable. So it's important for Alabama to get their work done early in the non-conference slate to give themselves a little bit of cushion, because the back 9 is going to pick up heavily.
Yeah. It's going to be brutal, but it's going to be fun to watch. He is Richard Hendrix. He'll be talking about it all season long on the SEC Network and ESPN. Thank you for the time, Richard. Always good to see you.
Thank y'all for having me, guys.
All right, buddy. Take care. Richard Hendrix with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline.